welcome to those that are on the call. My name is John Fennell. I'm the CEO of the International Copper Association for Australia. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us for the second week of our webinar series. And I have to do two things here. Sorry. Today we've got the second of the webinar series, deploying Wi-Fi in residential homes. And before we start through this, I'm going to be muting you all because the feedback of 100 people online is quite noisy. So I hope you accept this. And also, I'd like to record this session so that we can put it onto our website and allow other people to join at a later stage. So let me have. Right. I'd like to acknowledge the registrars of whom you are members, and ACRS and BCRS, ASIL, FPAA, and ITAB, and they support the webinar series as well as the Registered Cable website. And if you've not had a chance to visit that website, go to www.registeredcablers.com.au. It's very worthwhile for you. The webinar is going to run for about 60 minutes, and at about the 40-minute mark, we're going to move into Q&A. And so I'd encourage you, if you've got some questions through all of this, please go to the chat box, which is on the bottom of the screen, and register your questions, and I'll collate those and we'll feed those through to Ian and Joseph at the end of the session. The session is going to cover the basics of Wi-Fi, the various options that you have in respect to that, and the nuts and bolts of deployment. So let me introduce you to Ian Millner, who is a specialist for the International Copper Association, and Joseph Daboul, an expert in this field. So over to you, Ian, and to Joseph. And for those of you who've just joined, I'm going to mute.
Thank you very much, and welcome to all. I will now progress on the slides because I think you've now seen the cup of coffee for long enough. So as John mentioned, these are the sort of topic areas we're going to cover. Just some basics on Wi-Fi. We're going to look at the options. I'll talk to the basics and the options, and then Joseph will talk into the nuts and bolts, and then we'll just unmute your phones at the end, and we can just do a Q&A, given that the numbers are not huge today, which is a bit disappointing, but a lot of people do watch these afterwards. We know that from the last webinar. Something like 150 people watched it after the event. So in short, some of the basics we're going to cover is just Wi-Fi standards. Just so when you're out there talking to people and they mention all these things, you just know they exist. Frequency bands, there's a lot of talk about frequency bands, and also a little bit about security, just making sure that you actually are conscious of security, because these are one of the weak spots in any installation. So the standard frequency bands, and frequency bands, the Wi-Fi was deployed obviously a number of years ago. It was based on the widespread spectrum development done by the CSIRO, and then it has evolved from there. The important thing is that it started off with 802.11 running at the frequency band of 2.4, where you had a lot of the remote controls, garage opening, microwaves tend to work in that same space. And as you notice, we're running at 2 megabits, and we thought we were doing, pretty good because we had mobility. Then it went to obviously 54 megs and introduced frequency band of 5 gigahertz. What's interesting that the early adoptions, the early standards are not backward compatible. So obviously, if you bought the 802.11a, you couldn't connect to 802.11. The important thing is that this has now morphed into 802.11g, then N, AD, and AX, and so on, and has developed. The key is not only has it developed, but they're backward compatible. And also, you now notice in 2014, they introduced the certification. So the Wi-Fi Alliance now provides certification for Wi-Fi 5 and 6, which is generation 5, generation 6. Some people tend to call it G5, G6. And this is Wi-Fi, not mobile networks or cellular networks, which are also referred to as 4G, 5G being 4th generation, 5th generation. They obviously both provide mobility. They're different elements. The thing is, this one, which is certified as 5 and 6, now work in frequency bands 2.45 and 60 gigahertz. 802.11ax goes in 2.45, 6 and 60 gigahertz as well. The higher the frequency, fantastic, because you get more throughput. The downside of high frequency is at 60 gigahertz, the Wi-Fi signal has trouble even penetrating, gyprock walls. So in an essence, if you're going to deploy it into residential residence, you have to output Wi-Fi access points in every room if you're going to work at 60 gigahertz. That's not common, by the way, but it's one of the standards that's available. It's more common in Japan. They have smaller buildings too, by the way. With security, it's evolving. We started off with web, which had it's exactly what it says here. It's better than nothing. It had some basic encryption. It was the starting point just to hang on. We had an open Wi-Fi, and suddenly people realized that someone could walk into your house or would be outside your house and potentially connect to your Wi-Fi and use your internet. I had an example. My brother, for probably about 2 years, used to use the internet of the guy that lived behind him because the guy just left it open. My brother didn't bother actually having broadband for a while. That changed when he discovered security, and then they went into WPA, which they increase and enhance the security to address some of the vulnerabilities. Okay, they increased the sort of level of encryption by having 256 bits. Okay, they obviously brought in different models of encryption like TKIP. But again, from your point of view, the key is what you've got to do is select the highest level of security, and the devices that attach to it also have to work at the highest level of security. Otherwise, what you do is you end up in a situation where the security protocols are only as good as the weakest link. So that brings us into something that it's rather key, and I'm just going to go back because you can have all these, but then if you just allow all the defaults to remain on your router, your username and password. So someone walks into your house and they're going, typically this, device, this house, uses the Telstra modem. So therefore, they probably use this username and password. It just undermines the potential security. So it's also worthwhile increasing the level of security by changing default passwords. In particular, when you add CCTV devices or anything that's, not something that is not part of, or allowing people to access wirelessly. The other thing is if you've got printers that have, connections to them that are sitting on the network, someone could connect to them by Wi-Fi and then use that as a way in. So just keep in mind, security is only as good as your weakest link. And that's something worthwhile pointing out to customers, in particular, if they're going to bring stuff into the house and plug it in and do the DIY. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. Now, when we talk about the options, so that's the basics. And we don't need to spend any more time because what we're trying to do is work out how to deploy this. So the deployment, there are three main options that you can use. One is use the gateway that has inbuilt Wi-Fi, which is typically supplied by the carrier. So your internet service provider will provide you with one, and you can then use that as the basis of your Wi-Fi. The second one is you could then use extenders on that. And that just makes the network a little bit more accessible in areas of the residence where you can't quite get Wi-Fi. And some of the carriers tend to not only supply the basic router, but then you can also buy extenders, which, obviously will work together quite easily and much easier to configure because you're dealing with the same make manufacturer. So it's up to you which way you extend a network. the final bit is you can actually create your own separate network, which means is you have the gateway, and then you literally build a whole network behind the gateway, and the gateway is just a standalone device so that you can then control the security, and we'll talk about that a bit more. So using your own gateway, all internet service providers I was mentioning provide a gateway that has a Wi-Fi. So we call it gateway because it actually does your modem, so it literally decodes the incoming signal from your DSL line, ADSL line, fiber to the node, whatever interface you're using, it decodes that and then provides that you typically on Ethernet ports and Wi-Fi at the other end. Now, this again might be a perfect solution for most premises. Notice what we say there, just make sure they don't use the default credentials for security purposes. So you might as well do that. Now, that is very convenient and very simple. And a customer can also maintain their own if they want to. It's up to them. You could actually show them how easy it is to actually get into one of these devices. And for some customers, it's probably worthwhile. Some customers will probably generate a bit more work, by the way, when they call you when they've actually stuffed up something. So, but again, it's a simple solution. The second one is you can use the Wi-Fi extender. So you notice here, I've just picked one of the one of the carrier services. And then I've said, okay, you could literally just put an extender, and the extender is either connected wirelessly or with a cable. That you decide. Now, the most effective way to connect something would be with a cable, because then you don't limit the Wi-Fi. So in this case here, if you're using the Wi-Fi signal to extend the network, then part of this, the capacity, the bandwidth, the amount of space you have to be able to transmit the signal to the device has to be shared with the extender. So these two devices will then, in an essence, if you think about it, it's like having two separate lanes. One will be for the booster to talk to the modem and the modem to talk to the booster, okay, so that it can then extend the network out. The other one is for obviously to be able to talk to the mobile device, your laptop, your mobile phone, your tablet that you're using. The advantage of that is always tends to be much easier to set up. The disadvantage is that obviously the extender has to be within range, within reasonable signal strength. So we'll try to illustrate this by saying, well, green signal strength is really good. Yellow signal strength is adequate. When you get below yellow, and we're using those colors because typically there are the apps that you can use for measuring signal strength that tend to use these colors. Then you have orange, and then obviously it just gets into a black zone, a deep hole. Alternatively, if this becomes an issue, you can then run, in most devices, you can run a cable. Not all of them, but again, you've got to check that out when you're proposing a solution to a client. So that's the second easiest option, given that you're using what the client already has. And by the way, just because I've shown these devices to be compatible, you can buy extenders. They don't have to be the same make and model. It's typically configuration is just a lot easier when you buy the one device. You can go down to JB Hi-Fi and buy your Netgear, all the same. So they talk to each other, and therefore you can actually easily extend it. Finally, is you can actually go the whole hog and set up your own network. So now, this carrier supplied gateway router, literally, that's it. That just terminates your WAN, and then just provides, as you notice, a local area network. So between here and here, the only connection between this gateway and the now newly installed router is actually just a local area network. The only device is that router, and therefore all traffic goes through this router. This router then can be configured. Now, you can buy whatever equipment you have. The best thing to do with these things, and I hate to tell you, the only way to really get confident with these things, buy some kit, play with it. Because configuration requires you to be able to look at the manual and play with it. And it's a lot easier to make a mistake when you're in your own home, when you realize you ticked the wrong box and you can untick it. When you're with a customer, the last thing you want to do is look as though you don't know what you're doing, okay? Which sometimes IT people look like, okay? So the advantage here is then you can then increase the level of security, because you can just configure that to make sure no traffic can get in here without the permission. Now, in all these cases, what we're using is what we call a mesh network, and that comes down to all of these, and I'll just go back, tend to actually supply what we call mesh network. In other words, the Wi-Fi name here and the Wi-Fi name here are the same. And as Joseph points out to me, the best description of a mesh network is no different to your mobile phone. You can grab your mobile phone, you don't know which base station you're connected to, but your mobile number doesn't change. The mobile network you're connected to doesn't change. So the same thing applies to any of these sort of deployments that you want to use. So that gives you a quick rundown on the basics and the options. Now over to you, Joseph.
Okay, thanks, Ian. If you don't mind, if you can keep your presentation on the screen, as I can't share mine, I'm using my mobile phone.
Yep, just tell me when you want to go ahead, Joseph.
Yeah, that's no problem. Now we're gonna go through the nuts and bolts. In this topic, we will be talking about surveying the area. Obviously, determine which is the best location to place the repeater or an extender, and then configuring a Wi-Fi network, accessing the gateway, obviously, in order to start the initial configuration, and also using mesh network. Well, starting first with surveying the area, I don't know how many of you are aware of some of the basic tools on the internet that you can download on a mobile phone. That would be something like a Wi-Fi analyzer. Generally, some of that, they're free. They are free apps, by the way. They are available mostly for Android that I know of. Apple a bit funny when it comes to applications like this. Why exactly, I really don't know, but you can download one for Apple. It sort of does the job. I don't know how well. I don't use Apple, but it's sort of the idea behind this. It gives you a signal strength, but don't be fooled. Seriously, don't be fooled. Sometimes you can have a strong signal, but you think that strong signal is going to give you a good throughput. No, it does not. It depends entirely on the type of access point that you are connected to. And it also depends on whether you are using 2.4 or 5 gig. Sometimes you can get high signal on a 2.4, lower signal on a 5 gig, yet the 5 gig can give you much better performance. But that is dependent entirely on the environment you operate in. As you can see on the Wi-Fi analyzer, you can use either a channel sort of analysis as a channel, or this particular one actually not only gives you a carrier level as a signal level, it also gives you an indication as to how busy that particular channel is. Sometimes if the channel is a bit too busy where it is congested, that could give you problems. So what happens is you can go to another channel where these signals do not actually overlap. Generally, I find the first channel and the last channel are, in other words, you can select it manually. And the other thing you can do is if you place in repeaters, you can use the Wi-Fi analyzer, which is the meter screen. That gives you indication as to the level in dB. Well, generally, if you were to install a repeater or an Wi-Fi extender, you would not want to go below minus 70 dB, because otherwise, if you go lower than minus 70 dB, you will be boosting a weak signal, and that's really not going to do you a much favor. So you got to be careful. Try and place a repeater in a position where you have adequate to a excellent signal if you can. And if we go to the next part, you will see that generally where it is within the house where the strong signal is that green area. And that would be somewhere in the vicinity of the router. But then again, how strong that signal is dependent entirely on the router Wi-Fi capability. That orange one, or the yellow one, I should say, that would be sort of adequate signal, mid-range. That would be around somewhere between -70, -80 dB, where there is the red area is no signal. In other words, a repeater could be installed either in the green region or the yellow region. Never install it in around the area where it is in the red region. In the red region, in other words, what you're doing, you're only going to boost bad signal. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to start looking at how to actually start configuring that. But before we do, you need to know the structure of a local area network. We have a router, which is the gateway, and that is generally basically that is the heart of the entire system. That is basically the interface between the local, your devices at home, and the outside world, which is the internet. Generally, you need to figure out what the IP address of that specific router in order to access it, to access the GUI interface or the website of the actual router, so you can perform some or do some configuration. How do we do that? Well, you can use the old-fashioned way of using a command prompt. Start, run, CMD, enter, and you get this black box. That is called the command prompt. With that command prompt, you enter a command ipconfig. Well, the ipconfig will actually give you a whole list of numbers. The IP address of the computer you're using, the subnet mask, and the gateway. Now, the gateway address is the one that you use in your browser to actually access the gateway configuration page. You need to be careful here. What you need is a username and password. Generally, this username and password you can get from the customer. Obviously, the customer or the owner or whoever, they have a username and password. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But that's where you get it from. Once you get in, and then you're going to go into the wireless configuration. As you can see there, you click on wireless. In the wireless configuration, you have to choose then whether you're going to use. Generally, you're going to have, depends on the gateway again. Is it going to be 2.4 gig or 5 gig? That's entirely up to you. This particular one here is showing that particular part here. Do not change. This is not something that you need to change. This got nothing to do with the wireless, with the Wi-Fi at all. This is basically the gateway own IP address, and that's generally a static IP address. It should not be changed. Leave it as it is. The second part is the subnet mask, which is outside of the scope of this particular topic. And then we have an IP range for the DHCP server. Don't change anything there, guys. This specific setting is simply to allow this server to actually allocate IP addresses to any connected devices automatically. And obviously, as you can see here, you've got about 97 addresses. In other words, you can have up to 97 IP addresses automatically allocated to 97 devices. This particular one is actually the wireless settings. As you can see there, we have, you have 2.4 gig and we have 5 gig. And as you can see there on most, by the way, most GUI interface of any gateway have a similar type of, basically, they follow the same sort of style, where you have 2.4 gig, 5 gig, you either enable one or not the other, or you enable both of them. Now, a lot of that stuff you can leave automatically. For example, you enable 2.4 gig, fragment length, don't worry about that, leave that alone. Leave everything automatic. Transmit power control, also 100%. Transmit power control, that's basically the transmitter radio power, depending entirely on how far you want to go. If you are using extenders, leave it at 8%. That means what that does, if you have a larger place, larger house, and that will basically help push the signal a bit further, so you can get to a better signal at a longer distance. That goes the same for the 5 gig. Mind you, the 5 gig, as I said before, it travel the distance 2.4 gig can. 2.4 gig has a better penetration ability, especially through brick walls or concrete slabs. 5 gig not as robust as that, but it has much greater bandwidth. However, you got to be careful if you have concrete slabs, steel rayons, and all of that stuff. This is going to impact the wireless signal dramatically, really. Now, if we go to the wireless security, wireless security.
We're looking at the channels, Joseph.
Sorry.
So no, we're looking at the channels at the moment.
Yeah, I wanted to leave everything automatic. Yep. Yeah, leave everything automatic for that matter, unless, as I said before, if you find one of the channels that is some of the channels that are busy, what you can do is you may manually select a suitable channel. You see what it says there? Now, what you do is you select a suitable channel. Let's say, for example, a channel 6 may be very busy. The middle channels are busy, or congested. You go to a channel that is not as congested. Otherwise, leave everything as automatic. That way, you can't go wrong. The WPS settings. WPS settings generally for equipment that, like a printer, maybe a device that does not have a screen where you can in fact key in a password. If you enable that, that will enable you to press the button on the router, a WPS, but that can be a security hole though, because at that time, while this is enabled and it is in session, during that specific time, anyone can actually access it. So that you got to be mindful of that. If you're not happy with this, if you don't have any equipment that require a just automatic or simply easy access, that I call that the lazy way of accessing a wireless network. But then again, sometimes, like I said, you cannot avoid that if you have equipment that do not support keying username and a password. The other thing is associating with main LAN. That is wireless card, and not forget about that. That is outside the scope of this particular session. The other thing we're going to talk about is main Wi-Fi. that you've got 2.4 gig, 5 gig, which is that would be associated with the main LAN. However, now we have guest network. Guest network, you can set them up to allow you to actually offer that to perhaps visitors. If you have business, your guests, you can have 2.4 gig or 5 gig guest network. Generally, the guest network, the idea of that is that it gives a user an access directly to the internet without any visibility of your network, of your personal network. Why? Because it actually logically places it on a totally different IP network. That I would recommend that if you have a situation where you have visitors, for example, to a business, visitors as your friends, whatever, you can give them this one. That way it prevents anyone, in fact, accessing your main network. The other thing, as you can see there are the channel. This happens to be set up to channel 12. Okay. By the way, here it has a channel width 240 or 40 gig. You got to be careful here. What I would normally do on a 2.4, what I would try and do, leave it at 20 gig. But once you go to 40, you have increased the channel width, and what you've done is you have caused overlapping. Overlapping sometimes could look, even though the 40 gigs are going to give you greater bandwidth, but there's a drawback here, because it's going to actually cause overlap. That could cause you problem and congestion. The other thing would be the name or the SSID, and then the security mode, WPA or WPA2. WPA2 happens to be the strongest you can use. However, not all devices can actually use or support WPA2. Some devices may not be able, especially earlier devices. Well, I don't know, some newer devices may not be able to either, because sometimes you'll find that you have a problem with a specific device having problem connecting to the network, even though the network name is correct, the passcode that you enter is correct, it still cannot resolve it. That means it cannot negotiate a link or negotiate a connection with WPA2. So you need to go to something like WPA mixed with WPA2. So it gives you an option to supporting both method, WPA1 or WPA2. And that basically applies exactly the same to the 5 gig and also as well as the guest network, 2.4 gig guest network or 5 gig guest network. Mesh network, and that's basically what Ian has mentioned earlier. What that does, basically what you're doing, the actual gateway has its own original Wi-Fi. What you can do with the mesh network, you are creating a master, slave 1, slave 2. So no matter, as Ian said earlier to you before, it's just like roaming throughout the network, like the mobile network. No matter where you go, no matter which.
You're right there, Joseph, you had frozen for a while.
Am I?
Yeah, you were totally frozen for about 30 seconds or something like that.
Okay, where did it freeze?
When you said Ian showed you this.
Ow, I said that Ian mentioned this particular mesh network where we have a gateway, which is the master, and you have two access points. Those 2 access points will represent, they actually repeat to the master, which is the access point in the router. By the way, you can in fact do away with the access point in the router. In other words, you can switch that off and only rely on the other two, where the other two can actually cover the entire premises. In commercial premises, you do not use the router as an access point. Normally, those Wi-Fi access points do act as both. They are an access point they also can in fact perform routing functionality. However, if you said Wi-Fi A, the WPA1 will still be Wi-Fi A. WPA2 is still Wi-Fi A. WPA3 is still Wi-Fi A. In other words, no matter where you go, you are still connected to the same network. And generally, the host or the client, like a mobile, tablet, computer, will in fact connect to the strongest signal that it finds. In other words, when it moves from one area to another, it simply switches to the stronger signal as it moves in between. The other one would be where to find information. Telstra, Optus.
Can I just butt in, Joseph? I forgot to mention at the beginning, it was very remiss of me. We are going to send you this presentation. The presentation will have all the live links in it. So don't worry about recording any of this. This will be sent to you so you can download it and access it. This is by no means a comprehensive list of places to find information. The main thing is that it gives you an idea, because typically you get to someone's house and you find that they've got a particular router and they've lost everything. But what you can usually guarantee is they haven't changed any of the default settings. So whilst you will not, when you look at, for example, Telstra, Optus, and IONET, and you go into their specific locations,
that's specific.
You can't find their username and passwords, but you'll find someone will have mentioned it somewhere in your bit of Google search, and you'll find, the Telstra one is Telstra, or admin's a username, Telstra's the password. So it's quite interesting. So that brings us to the conclusion of our main topic areas, which is Wi-Fi, some of the basics, the options, and into the nuts and bolts. And there's a lot of information, but you have to keep in mind, we only have 40 minutes, and we did it in 40 minutes. So
excellent, Ian. So if any of the participants would like to unmute and ask any questions directly to either Joseph or Ian, why don't you do so now?
Feel free. We're not going to bite you. One of the things to note, and I'll probably just go back in the presentation, because when Joseph was talking about the issue with channels, is ideally when you get to a lot of the settings, most of them you can just leave them in automatic nowadays, in particular when you have a mesh network. But here is, when you look at these apps, they will show you if a channel is particularly busy. And if that's the case, as Joseph mentioned, you can then actually go and literally allocate a channel. The flip side of allocating a channel is that that channel gets busy because your next door neighbor then also changes the channel configuration and selects yours, then it'll get busier as well. So the advantage of having the mesh network and allowing channel to be automatically selected, then the device will work out based on throughput. So that's probably the better approach.
On that note, in some good quality gateways, they have a functionality. It's called auto steering. What auto steering does, you leave everything automatic, and it does it on its own. In other words, if a specific channel becomes busy, it simply switches to a channel that is not as busy.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't believe this option or this feature can be found in every in every router.
Especially the carrier supplied ones tend to be limited. They don't do any of that
They are.
shaping. They're processing. The flip side, and I'll just again go back to one of this option here. So the reason some people go for this option is because when your local area network goes down, when your carrier service goes down, so for example, your broadband service goes down, the WAN goes down, then this device typically prioritizes all its resources to getting that link back up, because that's actually its primary job, is to connect you to the broadband, which means that on the LANs, on this side of the network, okay, it will stop talking. Now, if that's the case, it means that on this side of the network, if you're doing local things, like for example, you're working on a document in your house and you want to print, you might find that the network has problems because IP addressings haven't been allocated, or in the case of some homes where you've got automation that use IP addressing, it can't be accessed because it relies on this device, which not only has your modem trying to decode the broadband, it has your router function, which allocates all the IP addresses. It then has, typically on the back of these, you have these ports, which are switch ports. And so in an essence, it brings your network to a halt. So by you actually saying, okay, I'll put in my own router and then create my own separate network, then this will keep on running, and all this router will then just wait for that link, that connection to come up. But as far as it's concerned, it knows it has no connection to the internet, but it can still operate all the other functions within a home. So these are sort of things you've got to consider when you're talking about deploying Wi-Fi into a home. What I strongly recommend is that you literally go out and decide you're going to offer a particular solution to a client, spend a few dollars, buy the kit, play with it, become confident. Because, and I'll go back, and I think Joseph will agree with me, when you start doing things like setting this up and then configuring, obviously we're just showing you one example, but there are a variety of examples, and each one will have their own little quirky things, and it will have this box that you got to tick and not that one. And if you're not conversant with it, you just seem to waste a huge amount of energy trying to determine where to find things. The other thing that is interesting with this type of scenario here is that some of these wireless access points also have physical connectivity. So you can then extend the network and then have something like a printer physically connected here. So you've only got one cable, which where in the original setup, the household might have had the carrier network and might have then extended that carrier network using a cable to a printer. Well, you can now replace that. You can use the same cable to connect the wireless access point, but on the back of the wireless access point, connect the printer, so they haven't lost the functionality of what they had. So there's sort of things that you've got to look at when you're looking at the type of equipment that you have. So it's up to you. Any exciting questions coming up?
Gentlemen, thank you for your presentation. I wonder if you'd like to comment on life expectancy of telco supplied routers. They don't seem to be very reliable.
Sorry, the carrier supplied?
Yes, carrier supplied.
Okay, can I say something on that?
Joseph, please.
Most carriers supplied their entry-level type routers. They are what I would call retail grade. Generally, they come with basic functionality, and therefore that's how they, well, I guess what they're giving you is something cheap. However, if you want commercial grade, and then you have to buy it and pay for it yourself. I don't know whether you noticed you can go to a retail store like JB Hi-Fi, Harvey Norman, or whatever, and you can buy a router that have 3 or 4 antennas at the back, and you pay big money for them. Have you seen something like this, like a Netgear? Those ones they can actually provide you not only with a lot of functionalities. I'm talking about advanced functionalities and features, and also provide you with a robust Wi-Fi reception as well. Why? Because rather than using a basic omnidirectional radio transmission, they use unidirectional transmission, which means you get much better signal and more of not only the signal level, you got to also there is something beyond that with a bit more, something you don't normally see, which is the signal power. If that power is not there, no matter how the signal is strong, it's not going to be stable. In other words, it's going to be sort of going up and down and sometimes even losing connectivity. So those commercial routers, they do give you a strong, stable connection. But
It's
that costs
worthwhile.
money. That costs money.
Yeah, it's worthwhile noting the other thing, by the way, and again, I'll think I'll take you back on this presentation to this sort of having a separate network, is that in this case, if that carrier connection is via copper, sorry, John, this is the one flip side with copper. Okay, we are from the International Copper Association, so the flip side is that it's great for delivering power, but it's also great for delivering lightning strike. So that carrier supplied router will probably go and protect you with your more expensive router. That router there, as Joseph was saying, has higher functionality. So in this case, for example, that happens to be a particular manufacturer, which happens to be Ubiquiti. But you can actually control the security to the point of view that, you can stop traffic by selected countries, IP address and things like that. I mean, you can't ever stop, people that really want to get into hack you will probably find a way, as you know, but the more sort of barriers you can put, the better it is for you going forward.
So have we got any more questions from the group?
If there are no more questions, John, I would like to just highlight one little thing. Now that we've done the Q&A session, is the Registered Cablers website.
Oh, okay, good.
So on the screen, you are seeing the Registered Cablers website, and this is designed to connect you with consumers. We get an average of about 4,000 unique visitors a month. They typically spend an average of 1.5 minutes, and the only thing this website is designed to do is to connect a consumer looking for a registered cabler. Most of the consumers are arriving here because they've been talking to NBN, Telstra, IONET, Optus, TPG, and the minute they talk about something, these guys automatically say, get your cabler and he'll fix it all up. And then they come over here looking for someone. And that's why it only takes them about 1.5 minutes. They go in there and they say, I'm in this state, I'm in this region, bingo. Now, if you guys are looking to try and, further your own business, or you're working for someone that's trying to expand the business, don't forget to access this and have a look at it.
Great. Thank you, Ian. And thank you all for joining. And we look forward to seeing you again at the next webinar that we'll be running in a couple of months' time. Again, following up for Ian, we'd invite you to have a look at the Registered Cablers website. We think it's terrific value for you. Thank you again, and we wish you all a Merry Christmas and good luck with your cabling. So thanks for joining us.